I am really excited to speak to James this afternoon. Just as a disclaimer, we have done an interview before, which makes me so excited because both James and I also manage bipolar, and speaking to him is such a joy. So I'm really excited to dive in. And I would just say his book is at the back by that bar, and please pick up a coffee after this conversation. A copy? A coffee? Take both. So, James, I'll let you go straight in. And I guess the question which a lot of people are really curious to find out, because ADHD is in so many places now, you hear it all the time. And I know that I even spoke to someone who is the elder generation this week who said, oh God, that's so trendy now, isn't it? And trendy is not necessarily a bad thing, but I would love for you to explain what ADHD really is, especially to someone who still thinks that it is just being hyper or easily distracted.
I've heard psychiatrists say it's very trendy nowadays, and they're the people that assess and diagnose ADHD. So ADHD is a lifelong genetic neurodevelopmental condition or disorder. What that means is that in the first few years of the brain developing, it develops just slightly differently. But particularly in the areas involved in what we call higher level thinking skills, what separates us from other animals. These are called executive functions, like organizing, planning, prioritizing, and regulating our emotions and our attention. And it manifests itself in lots of different ways. Most people are aware of it's something to do with attention, it's something to do with hyperactivity, but it's also struggling with emotion, struggling with impulsivity, struggling with day-to-day function in a society that's not been set up for people who think differently and don't have that slightly more neurotypical in rabbit ears approach.
And you just touched on it there, but I would love to hear more about how the emotional side of having ADHD feels.
I'll give you some examples. So emotional regulation is one of these high-level thinking skills. If you think of a time where something really big's happened and you've handled it relatively calmly, that's your brain regulating your emotions. Now, on my 50th birthday, we went to Lanzarote and we'd hired a car. So I was driving in a different car, in a different country, on the other side of the road, obviously speeding. And we got caught by the police, and the Guardia Civil have guns. So this huge, very attractive, muscular Spanish guy with a gun walks up to the car and taps on the window speaking in Spanish. So I had to go, "Lo siento, no hablo español." And he spoke wonderful English and gave me a ticket, and I was perfectly calm. Now, that wasn't a conscious thing. That was my brain regulating my emotions. Now, 2 weeks before that, we had a friend staying, and I was selling a computer. And I'd packaged it all up with all the bubble wrap and taped it and made sure the box was fully secure because I didn't want it to get damaged. And when I finished, I noticed I'd left the charging cable out. Within 3 hours, I was saying to my wife, I think we should just get divorced, because I'm just a burden, to be honest. Now, we had a guest staying with us. I went upstairs and cried for 3 hours because I hadn't put a charging cable in a box. Now, that's emotional dysregulation, which is very common in ADHD. Probably 70 to 80% of people with ADHD get emotionally dysregulated, which means having emotions that are very intense, that last for a long time and aren't aligned either with your values or kind of social norms. And for many people, it's almost the most debilitating part of ADHD, because you can say and feel things that you don't mean, and they can have a lasting impact.
There's also quite a big spoken about link between overwhelm and ADHD, and with so much technology around now and everyone relying on it every day, what is the main difference between someone who's overwhelmed by technology and someone with ADHD, and how do you tell that difference?
I think overwhelm is a term that means different things in different contexts, because overwhelm and ADHD often relate to almost shutdown. I get overwhelmed all the time. So when I was an academic, I'm a recovering academic now. I was an academic for 20 years, and I used to answer about 150 emails a day because my motivation was fear. Now, when I stopped being an academic and I don't have that motivation, I value my emails much more. I can't answer more than 10 because I don't have the motivation, and I get overwhelmed by lots of messages coming in to the point where I have to just avoid and push all of that away. And I think when it comes to technology, particularly technology which is very suited to ADHD, social media platforms like TikTok, which were just like they were designed specifically for people with ADHD, 30 to 60 second videos where you can just swipe and find the next one. it can be both seductive, it can be soothing, but it can very quickly become overwhelming for people with ADHD in particular.
And when emotions sometimes feel particularly intense and overwhelming, and it can sort of play with your emotions, why is that so hard for people with ADHD to manage?
The biology of it, apologies guys, this is going to get not too dry. So the outer parts of the brain are the more rational parts of the brain that we evolved to. So there's a reason, if you look at a nature documentary and you see a gazelle being born, within minutes it's up and it's walking around and it can find its mother and it can be fed. Now human children, I don't have one, but I've seen some. Is it fair to say functionally useless? Just kind of lie there and you have to do everything for them for a couple of years, and that's because they're spending that time to develop the outer parts of their brain which provide rational control over our actions. Now normally those outer parts of the brain are well connected to the deeper inner parts of the brain, and that's where the emotions sit. But in ADHD they're not as well connected. So when you have an emotional part of the brain that's already looking for threats, as it is in ADHD, and then when it finds a threat, whether it's real or not, the outer part of the brain is less able to say, it's okay, you're just watching a horror film, it's not real, calm down. So that state of, we call it arousal or emotional arousal, kind of maintained. So even when something hasn't happened, if you think it has happened, and a big part of this, for example, is rejection sensitivity, this severe response to being rejected, criticised or ignored, or thinking you've been rejected, criticised or ignored, or even thinking you're going to be. So even if it's not reality, our brain can create such an emotional landscape that can become completely dominant over what we're doing at that time.
Learning a lot again, even though I've heard this before, I feel like your answer's always a bit more sort of, I don't know, educational. But my next question, obviously with ADHD, a lot of things can be affected in your life, and that's why a diagnosis is so important for people to sort of start to learn how to manage, especially with relationships. I'm sure the romantic partner is the one who is most affected. What are some simple ways that someone can support their partner after a diagnosis?
Be careful what I say now, because my romantic partner's sat just over there, so and she's ADHD and also autistic. So it often depends on the relationship dynamic. In a neurodivergent, neurotypical relationship, what you often get is the non-neurodivergent partner feeling that they're parenting, they're having to do all the organisation, manage all the bills, and they can feel like they're kind of invisible, and the ADHD partner always feels like they're to blame, and therefore they feel like they're unlovable. In a neurodivergent relationship, it can just be utter chaos and utter joy at the same time. And Sam and I the other night were I think realising that our neurodivergences clash. So I was going to put a film on, so I pressed play and then pause because my the arm fell off her glasses. Now there was another pair of glasses right next to her, but she had to fix the glasses before we started, so I'm sat there rocking with the pause button, waiting for her to fix the glasses. And then she went, I've just got to go and grab my crochet, 2 seconds. So I'm still sat there like I've got to start this. I'm so impulsive, I can't wait. But her neurodivergence was she had to finish those things. So it can cause great joy, but also conflict. And that can include emotional intimacy issues, not feeling like you're a team, and physical intimacy issues. Apologies for this, everybody. I know it's Sunday, but I often tell an anecdote when I do public talks. It's really easy to lose an erection when you're thinking about crisps. Now, mind wandering is a big part of ADHD, so you can be involved in the most intense and important task, conversation. All of a sudden, you're thinking about other things for 30 seconds, and then you're back in the room. Try explaining that to your partner. It was prawn cocktail crisps, in my defence. And she did get her own back about 6 months later when she pointed out the cobwebs during an intimate act in the wall, obviously not on my body. Then you've got sensory processing issues, so people can like to be touched somewhere really a lot or not at all. And because we often, when we meet a partner, we don't give them a manual to who we are, do we? We don't say, here are the things that I like sexually, emotionally, politically, intellectually. We kind of have to guess and learn, which is fun. But it also means for some of us, if we don't ask the right questions, we don't know. So often, couples can go years before they actually find out how to best communicate with their partner. And that's the absolute key for a neurodivergent relationship, is good communication.
I know that, I mean, we both know that there's a lot of overlap between autism, bipolar, and ADHD, and I get huge hyperfocus, especially around people when I'm first dating them. And I'm always sort of nearly engaged within a week, and then my friends see that pattern happen several times a year. What is actually happening in hyperfocus for someone like you and I?
So that's what we call limerence. And limerence is more common in ADHD. You know, when you meet someone, it doesn't have to be somebody that you're physically attracted to, but you meet someone new and you think, my God, they're amazing. There's just something about them. With limerence, it goes a bit further than that. It often becomes like an obsession. Why haven't they texted me back? They texted me last night. This person's great. And I had limerence with a guy that I met in Ibiza, to the point where I ended up lending them £7,000 for their business venture. And they weren't scamming me, but I genuinely thought, yeah, we've got this incredibly close relationship. And I had therapy for this, to get over my limerence for a man that I met in Ibiza. Now, hyperfocus, whether it's a person or an activity, is an intense state of flow. So distractibility is a key thing in ADHD. We're more distractible, but distractibility is a purposeful biological thing. So if we're all in here now and the fire alarm goes off, we need to be distracted by the fire alarm. So there is part of the brain that's constantly scanning the exterior for, should I be distracted by that? When we go into hyperfocus, that all shuts down, and you end up completely engrossed in an activity, possibly for hours, to the point where you might think, well, I haven't eaten, I haven't drunk, I haven't got up from my seat, I've started menstruating, my wife's shouting at me, you know, the power's gone off, because everything else seems to just disappear from focus. When it comes to hyperfocus, you can lose hours in an activity that sometimes you don't even want to do, because if your brain finds it rewarding, then it will say, carry on, carry on, carry on. It's like the just one more is three of the most dangerous words with ADHD. If you think of Netflix, when it gets to the end of an episode and it's auto-cue, and you think, oh, just one more before bed. And then at the end of the next episode, you think, oh, go on, just one more. And it's almost like that. It's this continuous anticipation of the reward you're going to get that means you're so laser-guidedly focused on something that the rest of the world just disappears.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's annoying that we don't have choice over what we get sucked into, because I'd be so good at aspects of my job if I could just turn it on, but it's always weird things like an app where I can see how many people have arrived at an event I've produced, and there's 200 people arriving and I'm on 11 and I'm there, and it's really unhelpful because obviously someone's checking them in. But anyway, we're learning. My next question, which sort of comes into this, because it's just one of those things where people think they know what ADHD is a lot of the time and they don't. But what is one of the biggest misconceptions about ADHD?
There are so many, but I think probably the most damaging is, and it still persists, if we ignore the it's not real one, which is probably the biggie, because it's very real. The first scientific paper on ADHD was published in 1775. And there was a Greek doctor in 320 BC that wrote about ADHD. But probably the most damaging now is that it's a trendy bandwagon. That people are trying to jump onto this bandwagon to get something, when in fact around between 3 and 5% of everybody has ADHD. So that could be 2.5 million people in the UK, and only 1 in 9 of those are diagnosed. So we have, possibly 1.5 million, 2 million people who are suddenly waking up to the fact, oh, there's a reason that I've had some challenges in the past. There's a reason that these relationships failed, or I left that job, and are now seeking support. And the NHS is literally closing down services and limiting access and saying, no, we haven't got the money to support you. So, in some places, 7-year, 8-year wait to get an assessment, or there's no ability to get an assessment. So that concept that it's this trendy bandwagon that people want to get on, if it is, it's the shittest bandwagon ever, because it's been rolling for the entirety of human existence. It takes you 7 years to get on there, and when you get on there, all you get is a tiny bit of weak speed every day. It's not a great bandwagon, to be honest.
I'm going to come on to medication as a later question, because I'm interested to hear your opinion on it. But as a society, why do you think it is so challenging to live with ADHD, and what changes do you think could be made?
I think it comes back to that concept of society. There are two ways of looking at ADHD, the medical model and the societal model. The medical model is it's a medical condition diagnosed by medical people, it's treated medically, it's managed medically. The social model is it's not a disorder, it's a difference. And actually, if society made things more welcoming and simple for people who were neurodivergent, they wouldn't have the challenges that they have. And I'm going to give you a really quick example of where this is the case. When I got diagnosed, we set a podcast and a charity and impulsively did loads of things and then just left my wife to run them all. And somebody was on our online community and they were in a job they were unhappy with, in a relationship they were unhappy with, and they subsequently were diagnosed with ADHD and autism. Left their partner because they'd met somebody in this online community, learned how to code in 10 weeks, built an AI and sold it for £2 million. I didn't get a penny. Obviously joking. But what that tells you is that context is everything. If you're in the right environment with the right support and you're neurodivergent, you can absolutely flourish. But if you don't know what that environment is, and if that support isn't there and you're in the wrong job or the wrong environment, then life is going to be a struggle. So society, if you look at even financially from a slightly psychopathic financial view, it costs the government £17 billion a year to not diagnose and treat ADHD, from extra healthcare costs and extra welfare costs, etc. If society started to embrace and accept neurodivergence more, it would benefit everybody, not just neurodivergent people.
My next question was going to be, I guess a lot of my friends are looking into a diagnosis because this conversation has become a lot more rife. But for someone who's maybe 50 or 60 getting a diagnosis at that point in their life, what effect can that have?
So I was 45 when I got diagnosed. I was told 5 years before, my colleague and arch nemesis Alex, who's co-author of the book and podcast and charity, he phoned me up 5 years before I was diagnosed and said, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD and you're way more ADHD than I am. And we laughed, and I did all the online tests and stopped laughing, and then thought, and this speaks to medicine as well, I did nothing with that information for 5 years because I was medication hesitant. Despite the fact that I loathe myself with the burning intensity of 1,000 suns, I thought, well, what if medication changes me? So I didn't seek a diagnosis because I thought I don't want to become somebody else, even though I hated myself. Now, when I got diagnosed at the age of 45, it's been so incredibly powerful, not just the help that medication provides, not just the help that having legal protection in the workplace provides, but looking back through my life through this new lens of understanding, oh, that's why that happened, and understanding when things happen. So I tend to use humour to try and de-weaponize both my bipolar and my ADHD. It means now when things happen, like, you know, for example, I had a friend that came around to visit recently, and this happened on the same day, and he said, have you got a camp bed that I can borrow? And I said, yeah, of course. And I wasn't really paying attention, so I grabbed one and gave it to him, because what I was doing was buying tickets to see Goldie Look and Chain. That's how old I am. In Newport, where they come from in South Wales, and I bought them and thought, great, and then noticed that actually, no, it's Newport in the Isle of Wight I bought the tickets for, not Newport in South Wales, so I can't go to that gig. And I bought the insurance, but the insurance doesn't cover that. And then I got a message from my friend saying, is this a camp bed? And no, it was an inflatable sex chair that I hadn't checked that I still had and gave my friend to go away. So I have to try and use humour and oversharing to try and de-weaponize what could be a kind of a shameful or embarrassing couple of events that end up adding to what we call the ADHD tax of life.
Humour is definitely a great way for people like us to cope with the actions we pursue. And I'll come back onto that later. But you did just touch on medication, and I think a lot of people in the room who are maybe thinking, should I look in to get a diagnosis? Because I guess that's what you then get access to. What does the medication do, and what are your views on it? Has it helped you a lot to have that? Yeah,
so no medication is safe for everybody, obviously. Every medication has side effects, and I know there's a lot of mistrust with big pharma, and I share that mistrust in many ways, but the medication is effective in around 80% of people. And effective varies from, oh my God, this is how everyone else thinks, to, well, I've got more motivation and more focus, and I can function a bit more easily. For the 20% for whom medication doesn't really work, they will just get offered CBT on the NHS, and there's evidence that doesn't really work that well unless it's ADHD informed. So there aren't many other options. Now, the medication works by increasing the levels of brain chemicals called dopamine and noradrenaline, which don't work as well in ADHD, but only by a tiny amount. And they are mostly stimulants. So I take an amphetamine, a slow-release amphetamine, and you may have heard of Ritalin, was the first ADHD drug, methylphenidate, that's also very common. And all they do is, for a very short amount of time, a few hours, help regulate or normalize, that's a terrible word, the brain chemistry to allow the brain to be a little bit more quieter in terms of all the internal interference so that you can focus on what it is you want to focus on. Other things that help, and it's really important, I think, to talk about this, exercise helps. Sleep really helps, because about 80% of people with ADHD have issues with sleep, whether it's insomnia, delayed sleep onset, poor sleep quality. And mindfulness, which sounds like the least ADHD thing you can imagine. I tried Headspace, and within 15 seconds was swearing at the phone saying, of course I can feel the chair against my legs. I sat on it, for God's sake, before throwing the chair across the room. But mindfulness is any activity you're mindful. It could be dancing, it could be cooking, it could be walking, it could be in the bath. And we know that those things, exercise, sleep, mindfulness, can help with ADHD symptoms. For anybody that's on this journey of considering assessment, considering medication, I would say consider medication, because it can be transformational.
Great advice. What I would like to ask is, obviously you've spoken about emotional deregulation, and we've both now mentioned that you've also got a bipolar diagnosis. Has it been helpful to have two diagnoses? Because I think when you've already got one, it makes you, or in my case, it makes me worried to get another in case it's sort of like very pick me. And how has it been helpful for you to get both?
So I have all the diagnoses.
I'm about to have all three, so you're in the right company.
This bit's not even a joke. My family has a league table of diagnoses. And my sister faked a heart attack last year because she wanted to get into second above me. And she had tachycardia. Deb, don't try and pull the wool over our eyes. So I have ADHD and bipolar and binge eating disorder and substance use disorder and social anxiety disorder. And lots of people don't like these labels, these labels, but they help me understand myself. And I was very lucky that I had spent a long time preparing for looking for an ADHD assessment, so I was pretty sure I had ADHD. I'd also spent a year tracking my mood after watching Brassic and realising for the first time, oh God, I might actually be bipolar. That explains better than depression, the mood issues I've had. So I went for diagnoses at the same time, privately for ADHD, NHS for bipolar. The only concern is psychiatrists who are involved in almost all of these diagnoses often like pigeonholing, and often like if you've got a previous diagnosis of one thing, and if that thing smells a bit like other things, so ADHD and bipolar have a lot of crossover, so they also do with PTSD, they do with the awfully named borderline personality disorder, and therefore having a diagnosis of one can sometimes, in the wrong hands, with a psychiatrist that's not open-minded, lead to them saying, well, it's the thing you've already got a diagnosis for. But we know if you look at the co-occurrence of these conditions, if you've got ADHD, for example, you're nearly 10 times as likely to have bipolar than a member of the general public. So you're far more likely to have other neurodivergences, mental health conditions, physical health conditions as well, like chronic migraine, hyperflexible joints, hypothyroidism if you're ADHD. So going for both helped me understand both my day-to-day behaviour, but also this lifelong pattern of being flat, and then all of a sudden the slightest thing and I'm in despair, and then 2 weeks later I'm on a 5-day coke binge, kind of partying and doing everything I can to speak to everyone in the world, not knowing I was hypomanic when I was going into that period. So it's really helped me understand the day-to-day, but also the kind of the longer patterns of behaviour in my life.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to, I mean, anyone who knows me, I'll take any opportunity to raise awareness around this, but I think if you have an ADHD diagnosis and your depression does feel debilitating, the medication for bipolar is so different, and it makes things so much easier. So if you're having no luck with antidepressants, I'd really recommend having a look at bipolar as well. So friends, family members, how can we better understand someone with ADHD? Obviously, your book is a great start, but if you were going to give someone 3 things, what would they be?
Probably 3 better books. No.
Go for it.
No, okay, I'd say the first thing is, if you can, try and learn about ADHD. Because when I first found out about it, and I was a university senior lecturer teaching neurophysiology, I didn't know adults could have it. I was surprised when Alex phoned me and said, "You're more ADHD than me." So learn about it, and there are some reputable sources of information out there, charity websites, etc. The second thing is, give the friend, the family member, the partner, if particularly when it comes to emotional dysregulation, enough space so that if they need to walk away from a situation, they feel safe to do so. But the third thing is, and this is going to sound like it's not advice, it's okay to be pissed off with somebody with ADHD. It's also okay to have ADHD. And in any friendship or any familial relationship or any intimate relationship, there are always going to be times when ADHD symptoms will cause an issue. It's not the fault of the person with ADHD, because ADHD is a reason, not an excuse, but it's completely valid to be frustrated or annoyed that that's happened. So accepting that that's okay. It's okay to sometimes feel a bit pissed off if your friend hasn't messaged you back for something, or if they didn't book the tickets for that gig you were going to because they forgot. It's okay to be pissed off, but within the context of accepting there's a reason for that happening.
A lot of people, whether it's ADHD or another mental illness, mask in order to sort of fit in and try to let everyone in the room know that they are anything but what they have. How does that affect someone over a long period of time?
It's one of the reasons we're more likely to have burnout. So I've actually just gone into burnout. If anyone here isn't aware of burnout, the World Health Organization says it's a purely occupational health condition, but you're 3 times more likely to go into burnout if you're neurodivergent. It's complete mental and physical exhaustion, and lots of that comes from the cost, literally the energy the brain takes for you to mask, to hide your symptoms, to hide your behaviors, to suppress your emotions, to fit in. And this falls more heavily on women because there are different expectations for women than there are for men in society. And I would argue most people with ADHD, and it's probably the same with autism, don't actually know what all their masks are, because we've become, particularly if we're diagnosed late in life, we've become so heavily masked. The only reason that I'm called James, it is my name, but before I started my PhD, everyone called me Bob, short for Jim Bob. And then the first senior academic, when I started my PhD, that said James, I went, yes, because I thought, well, that sounds cleverer, and then maybe they'll think that I'm normal and like them. So that my name, or what I was called, changed because I decided that would make me be less weird than being called Bob when my name was James. And therefore, the masks that we build up and carry with us, which often start to tumble, particularly for women around perimenopause and menopause, or around big life events, that they cost us. They come at the cost of our mental health, they come at the cost of our physical energy. And it would be lovely to have a society where we just didn't, where we could just be ourselves. I mean, meetings would be chaos, I imagine, but chaos is sometimes good.
On the front cover of your book, you say that this is everything you need to know to survive and thrive as an adult with ADHD. Obviously, the common understanding is actually that kids have ADHD more than adults. Is that the case? Do people tend to grow out of it, or is it something you have for life?
So medically, the jury's out on that. Biologically, if you start with a different brain that's developed differently, that brain will always be slightly different. Now, the brain does adapt. It takes 30 years actually for adolescence to finish, and if anybody saw a news story that came out recently, so our brain finishes maturing at 30 years of age, but it still changes a little bit, life events and what we eat and where we go, etc. Working memory is a big issue in ADHD, and I've already forgotten the question. Can you repeat it?
I was going to say there's a common understanding that a lot of people or a lot of children have ADHD, and does it become more or less in adults, or it's like you just said,
so
once you have it?
The statistics are that around 2/3 of people, of children with ADHD, it will persist into adulthood. My suspicion is the other third. So we know, for example, that medication actually slightly rewires the brain. So it could be that long-term medication use can make life more manageable. It could be that people end up in a situation where they've got more support. I think if you are born with ADHD, you have ADHD, it's unlikely to go away. It probably, for some people, just becomes more manageable in everyday life.
And is there a test yet in terms of like a scan where you can see this, or are all of the sort of assessments people are waiting to have done, is that all just a verbal?
That would be magic, wouldn't it? It would stop the conversations with Peter Hitchens I've had on Twitter, arguing with him about whether it's real or not, because there's no objective test. So there is in children, there's a test called the QB test, which feels like torture when you've got ADHD, because you have to stare at a screen and track the movement of a cursor for a long period of time. And that is now accurate enough that it forms part of the diagnostic process for children, but it's not accurate enough in adults. If you look at brain scans, because it's really expensive to scan a brain, they show a pattern of changes which are detectable. But the problem is, we are diverse as a divergent group. So no two people with ADHD are exactly the same, and that's because no two ADHD brains are exactly the same. They all have similar changes, similar differences, similar patterns of activity and structure, but not similar enough that there's yet a brain scan where you can go, yes, that's an ADHD brain and that's a non-ADHD brain. We're probably 10 to 15 years away from having something like that that's scalable, so the NHS could use it as part of a diagnostic treatment. But before then, it will be more computerized, AI-based interaction to track eye movement while you're answering questions. Until then, we're stuck with what are very subjective tests, and tests where the questions were literally designed by looking at white boys with ADHD and saying, right, what do those white boys with ADHD do that we can measure in a test? So it discriminates against women, people of colour. The tests are not very good for ADHD, but sadly they're all we've got.
I'm sure there's a lot of people, I've just been asking all the questions I want to ask, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in the crowd.